Welcome back to another episode of SNEED-CAST Industry Update, your go-to source for staying sharp in a fast-moving world of manufacturing, packaging, coding, and beyond. If you've been with us for a while, you already know the drill, but if you're tuning in for the first time, welcome. We break down the stories shaping our industry so you can stay ahead of the curve without having to dig through the noise. Let's get into what's making headlines this week. I'm your host Alexa, and today we'll discuss topics ranging from the extended US-China trade truce and its impact on manufacturers to Kellogg's bold moves to eliminate artificial dyes from its cereals by 2027. We'll also dive into New Jersey's $500 million manufacturing incentive program, the Federal Reserve's ongoing debate over inflation versus job growth, and the latest on the stalled global treaty talks to combat plastic pollution. Starting off, the next 90 days just got a little clearer for manufacturers watching their margins and supply chains. The United States and China have agreed to extend their trade truce for another 90 days, a decision that holds significant implications for anyone sourcing, producing, or planning on a global scale. President Donald Trump signed an executive order to pause US-China tariffs, and China quickly responded with a matching extension. Had this agreement not been reached, US tariffs on Chinese imports could have risen past the current 30%, with China set to escalate its own retaliatory levies on US goods. For context, earlier this year, both countries had imposed tariffs as high as 145% for the US and 125% for China, before stepping them back in negotiations. Now US tariffs stand at 30%, China's at 10%. This pause effectively buys both countries time to negotiate further, possibly paving the way for a summit between President Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping later this year. For U.S. businesses, this extension brings both relief and opportunity. Sean Stein, president of the U.S.-China Business Council, emphasized the importance of this pause, calling it critical for negotiating an agreement that could improve market access in China and provide companies with the certainty they need for medium and long-term planning. Stein also pointed out, securing an agreement on fentanyl that leads to a reduction in U.S. tariffs and a rollback of China's retaliatory measures is acutely needed to restart U.S. agriculture and energy exports. From Beijing, the Ministry of Commerce announced relief for some American companies previously restricted under export controls and the unreliable entities list, either pausing or lifting select restrictions for another 90 days. Behind these negotiations is a structural shift in global trade dynamics. The U.S., once one of the most open economies, has adopted an increasingly protectionist posture, raising its average tariff level from around 2.5% at the start of the year to 18.6%, the highest in nearly a century. Japan and the European Union have accepted U.S. tariffs as high as 15% to stave off harsher measures. Meanwhile, China has demonstrated its own leverage by restricting rare earth metals and magnets critical for industries like electric vehicles and aerospace. June's partial detente saw the U.S. ease export restrictions on chip technology and ethane, while China improved access to rare earths for American firms. Ali Wynn, a specialist in U.S.-China relations at the International Crisis Group, puts the current situation in perspective. By overestimating the ability of steep tariffs to induce economic concessions from China, the Trump administration has not only underscored the limits of unilateral U.S. leverage, but also given Beijing grounds for believing that it can indefinitely enjoy the upper hand in subsequent talks with Washington by threatening to curtail rare earth exports. For plant leaders, the implications are concrete. Cost volatility is contained for at least another quarter, supporting more predictable sourcing and quoting. With relaxed export controls, immediate access to motors, magnets, and electronics is less uncertain, easing the pressures on inventories and production planning. Fewer tariff shocks mean greater confidence in scheduling and delivering performance, which is vital for onboarding new clients or rolling out new SKUs. Still, the current landscape demands vigilance. Audit vendor agreements, keep alternate suppliers ready, and anticipate potential disruptions if negotiations falter. Looking ahead, this 90-day reset is a valuable window, but it is not a resolution. Major issues like intellectual property protection, subsidies, and industrial policy remain unsolved. We advise you all to use this breathing room to secure pricing, strengthen supply chain diversification, and ensure flexibility with clients. As the U.S. trade deficit with China, $262 billion last year, reminds us, these negotiations shape not only policy but real business outcomes. The critical question isn't whether the trade wars end, it's whether your operation is agile enough to adapt if it doesn't. Kellogg, the company behind Fruit Loops and Apple Jacks, has announced it will remove artificial FD&C dyes from all its breakfast cereals by the end of 2027. It's a major shift, driven by mounting regulatory pressure and a clear rise in consumer demand for transparency and safer ingredients. And it's a move that isn't just about changing the label. It's already having downstream effects on ingredient sourcing, QA protocols, and line changeovers across contract manufacturing networks. Let's break down what's actually changing. Kellogg says that as of this January, they're no longer launching new cereals with FD&C dyes. For school channels, their entire portfolio will be reformulated to be free of these synthetic colors by 2026 to 2027 school year. And by the end of 2027, the entire portfolio, retail and food service, should be completely FD&C free. Now, it's important to note that Kellogg isn't starting from scratch here. The company says that 85% of the cereal it currently sells already contains no FD&C colors, and they haven't used red number 3 in years. Federal regulators banned that particular dye from food in January. So, we're really talking about the final stretch, transitioning that last fraction of products over the next 2.5 years. What triggered this acceleration? Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton recently announced that his office reached a legally binding agreement with Kellogg, a formal assurance that the company would permanently remove toxic dyes by the deadline. Paxton led an investigation earlier this year on potential consumer protection violations related to artificial colors in the food supply, pressuring major brands to step up. In his words, following months of investigating and negotiating, I'm proud to officially say Kellogg's will stop putting these unhealthy ingredients in its cereals. Notably, Kellogg is the first major U.S. cereal maker to ink a binding agreement like this. Kellogg's official response was measured but forward-looking. They thanked the Attorney General's office for what they called a collaborative focus on health and wellness and reaffirmed, "We will completely remove FD&C colors from the small percentage of our foods that contain them today by the end of 2027. And we are reformulating our cereals served in schools to not include FD&C colors by the end of 2026 to 2027. Looking beyond Kellogg, they're not alone in the shift. General Mills has committed to the same target, and Kraft, Heinz, Nestle, and Smuckers are also moving ahead with plans to phase out artificial dyes. On the policy side, the FDA maintains that currently approved dyes are safe for the vast majority of consumers. However, health advocates cite several studies showing potential links to neurobehavioral issues in some children. With political leaders putting more heat on manufacturers lately, the momentum is undeniable. So, what does all of this mean for plant operations and supply chains on the ground? First, reformulation will introduce more natural colorants like spirulina, beet, or turmeric. That means tighter control of color variability and potential new allergen reviews. Real-time quality checks will become essential to avoid costly rework and keep color on spec. From a supply chain perspective, it's time to secure backup natural color suppliers now. Seasonality and color strength can impact availability and cost. Build up your safety stocks, especially ahead of the back-to-school season. For QA and compliance leads, now's the time to update HACCP plans, label claims, and spec sheets so your plant is always audit ready. New ingredients might even affect your cleaning in place CIP protocols, so re-qualify those if you haven't already. And from an efficiency standpoint, keep in mind that natural colorants can behave differently during batching and thermal processing, so run some DOE trials to optimize at scale. For contract manufacturers, clear communication is crucial. Keep your partners up to date with pilot results, shelf life data, and any change management documentation to keep OTIF strong throughout the rollout. If you're weighing where to place your next line or whether to pull forward CapEx, New Jersey just put serious money on the table. The state is creating a $500 million tax credit program designed to incentivize manufacturing investment and job creation, aimed squarely at advanced manufacturing, non-retail food and beverage, defense, clean energy, and life sciences. Here's what's in play now and how it could affect your footprint, uptime, and hiring plans. The program, administered by the New Jersey Economic Development Authority, offers project-based tax credits with specific guardrails. The award equals the lesser of 0.1% of your total capital investment multiplied by the number of new full-time jobs, or 25% of your total qualified investment, capped at $150 million per project. For plant leaders, larger job-creating CapEx investments get rewarded, but careful, management is required to stay within the program's limits. There's also a strategic carve-out in the first 2 years. NJEDA will reserve $100 million specifically for clean energy product manufacturers, think solar, geothermal, and green hydrogen components. Any unused portion after 2 years rolls back into the general manufacturing allocation, sending a clear signal to energy transition suppliers that New Jersey wants you onshore and scaling. Stackable bonuses are available for companies with New Jersey business certifications, including minority and women business enterprises, facilities in opportunity zones, or those operating under collective bargaining or labor harmony agreements. If you're planning a brownfield restart or expanding urban operations with a union workforce, these bonuses can make your effective incentive significantly larger. NJEDA CEO Tim Sullivan describes the program this way. The next New Jersey manufacturing program will encourage manufacturers to establish and grow successful operations in New Jersey, producing impactful economic benefits for the state and its residents for generations to come. New Jersey is also leaning into its life science identity. Healthcare Institute of New Jersey CEO Chrissy Butts highlights the state's manufacturing depth, listing products from cell and gene therapies to metallurgic bone mesh implants and radio-aligned therapeutics, all manufactured in New Jersey today. For those running regulated high-mix lines, the state already offers robust infrastructure and an experienced talent pool. Here are some figures to keep in mind. $500 million is the total tax credit allocation, with $150 million is the maximum credit per project. The two-part formula awards the lesser of 0.1% of total capital investment multiplied by the new full-time employees, or 25% of qualified investment, and $100 million and reserved for clean energy manufacturers in the first 2 years. NJEDA has already approved 431 applications under its separate manufacturing voucher program as of July of 2025, providing $66.2 million in support across 3 phases. Awardees have committed to $252.7 million in capital investment, nearly 4 times the state's financial support. For co-mans and co-packers, these incentives can fuel expansion. Credits can offset automation and line upgrades and boost OEE and reduce changeover time. Tying hiring plans to CapEx investments helps maximize the benefits, right-sizing crews while driving productivity gains. Clean energy and life sciences suppliers may find it easier to accelerate line validation and scale up efforts without sacrificing compliance. Companies can stack bonuses tied to location and labor agreements, materially improving projects' returns. Governor Phil Murphy announced this program to catalyze manufacturing investment and job growth throughout the state, solidifying New Jersey's role as a hub for advanced production. The NJEDA will oversee the application process with thorough eligibility details and bonus structures available online. This program is part of broader NJEDA's initiatives. The manufacturing voucher program has already generated nearly $4 for private investment for every dollar of state support, and efforts like NJMEP's Future Makers and Creators Tour are helping to develop the next generation of manufacturing talent. For plants facing skilled labor shortages, that pipeline is just as important as the tax credit itself. Bottom line, this is more than a headline incentive. It's a practical lever to de-risk automation, expand capacity, and boost uptime, all while keeping your operation audit ready and improving OTIF. Right now, Fed officials are divided. The big question, is it more important to fight persistent inflation or to shore up a job market that's showing a few cracks? Their answer will directly shape borrowing costs, investment timelines, and even how aggressively your customers place orders as we head into Q4. Let's break down what's going on. The Fed's key interest rate stands at 4.3%. Wall Street's pretty sure about a 93% chance that a rate cut is coming in September. But inside of the Fed, officials aren't so convinced. Some point to weak hiring numbers as a reason to cut rates soon, hoping to give employment a boost. Others see inflation as sticking around longer than anyone wants, especially in services like dental care and air travel, and they worry that new tariffs could start another round of price increases. Job growth tells its own story. In July, hiring was sluggish and earlier months' numbers were revised lower. We're now seeing about 35,000 new jobs a month over the last 3 months, a sharp slowdown from 123,000 a month a year ago. Unemployment is still low at 4.2%, but the loss of momentum is causing more debate about what the Fed should do. On the inflation side, consumer price growth was only a bit higher last month, with little sign that tariffs are already raising the cost of goods. Still, service costs, think dental, airfare, things not directly touched by tariffs, are moving up, and that could make progress toward the Fed's 2% inflation target much harder. Inside the Fed, everyone seems to see things a little differently. Governor Michelle Bowman says that with inflation improving, the Fed should keep an eye on the softer job market. Chicago Fed President Austin Goolsbee isn't quite so sure. He thinks it's too soon to worry about jobs, citing low unemployment, and says the immigration crackdown may be playing a role in the slow hiring. What's worrying him is that service prices remain high, which could make inflation a bigger long-term problem. San Francisco Fed President Mary Daly believes tariffs will probably cause a one-time bump in prices, not a long-term spiral, and she's open to lowering rates if job numbers keep softening. Atlanta's Raphael Bostic is more worried about the big picture if more manufacturing moves home to avoid tariffs and labor costs rise. We could be in for a new era of higher inflation, not just a blip. That makes him hesitant to move rates too soon. And St. Louis Fed President Alberto Musalem thinks any big rate cut, like a half-point drop, isn't justified right now. Incremental changes are more likely. Let's bring this back to what matters on the floor. If the Fed cuts rates, you might see borrowing costs for capital projects and automation tick down a little, helpful if you're planning to upgrade a line or invest in new tech. But if they hold rates steady, costs stay put, and you'll want to plan accordingly. It's worth running the numbers for both cases just to see how sensitive your ROI is to even a small move. On workforce planning, if the Fed starts prioritizing jobs and lowers rates, demand for your product could stabilize, keeping lines busier and supporting OTIF targets. If they decide to keep rates high to fight inflation, credit could tighten up, customers and suppliers might get more cautious, and efficiency will matter more than ever, especially with changeovers and in labor scheduling. And keep an eye out for hidden costs. If inflation and services persist, you could see logistics, maintenance contracts, or third-party support start to creep up in price. Lock in key service agreements where you can and get clear KPIs in place to control costs. When it comes to tariffs, some at the Fed see the impact as short-lived, while others warn it could change the entire structure of the U.S. economy. It's smart to have a tariff contingency built into your cost structure and to review contract terms for price escalation clauses just in case. What's the takeaway? Over the next several weeks, 2 numbers, one more job report and one more inflation report, will likely determine the Fed's move in September. Their decision isn't just an academic exercise. It'll affect your cost of capital, your customers' appetite for new projects or launches, and how you balance staffing against fluctuating demand. Now's the time to run your scenarios and be ready no matter what the Fed decides. If your operation can stay flexible, keep compliance sharp, and run efficiently, you'll be ahead of the curve no matter which way the policy winds blow. The latest global talks on a treaty to end plastic pollution just wrapped up in Geneva, and after 11 days, negotiators are still at a stalemate. If you work with packaging resins or source plastics, you may want to pay attention. 183 countries came together to try for the first legally binding international agreement on plastics, but couldn't get across the finish line. At the heart of the deadlock, some nations want to cap new plastic production and regulate the chemicals used in plastics. Oil and gas producers, along with much of the plastics industry, pushed back against arguing for a focus on waste management, recycling, and better product design instead. About 100 countries supported production caps and broader restrictions. A last-minute draft did admit that current plastic use is unsustainable, but it stopped short of setting hard production limits, one of several reasons the talks hit a wall. Luis Vallas Valdiverso, who chaired the negotiations, put 2 draft agreements on the table. But on the last day, he had to announce that there would be no progress on moving forward with either closing the meeting with a gavel made of recycled bottle tops, a small reminder of the issue at hand. Still, some see reason for optimism. Inger Anderson of the UN Environmental Program called out that there was significant progress even if things didn't play out as hoped. For the European Union, Commissioner Jessica Roswell pointed to disappointment but urged everyone to keep going, reminding delegates, "The Earth is not only ours, we are stewards for those who come after us. Let us fulfill that duty." Let's put some perspective around the scale. Each year, more than 400 million tons of new plastic are produced worldwide, and without major intervention, that number could jump by 70% by 2040. These negotiations drew 1,400 delegates, and while nearly 100 countries are behind calls to limit plastic production and clamp down on hazardous chemicals, there's still no unified approach. What does this mean for manufacturers and supply chain teams working in plastics? The immediate takeaway is continued uncertainty. Whether or not there's a global treaty, you can expect customers, retail partners, and regulators to keep upping the pressure on issues like recycled content, chemical safety, and traceability. There will likely be more frequent audit requests for material origins and compliance. It's also smart to keep your packaging strategies flexible, balancing resin use, PCR post-consumer recycled content, and readying lines for more sustainable materials can give you a buffer against policy shifts. If you don't already work closely with your resin and colorant suppliers to ensure you can prove compliance if and when new rules finally arrive. Things to keep in mind. The lack of a deal highlights how tough it is to get global consensus even with so much at stake. But there's no excuse to delay improvement. Now's the time to double check your packaging roadmaps, push for higher PCR runs, audit your traceability, and get ahead on compliance. Operations that get this right will be better prepared to pivot whether the eventual treaty targets production caps, tougher ingredient standards, or both. In short, the world hasn't solved the plastic problem yet, but those who take action now will have the edge when global policy finally comes into play. This episode of SNEED-CAST Industry Update is brought to you by our SNEED-Pack Rotary Accumulation Table, the smart way to prevent slowdowns and keep your production line moving. It's designed for flexible integration at the end of your line or as an end feed. It accumulates filled containers efficiently while offering both clockwise and counterclockwise operations. It's available in 24, 36, 48, and 60-inch diameters to suit a range of packaging needs. Boost your throughput and eliminate bottlenecks with SNEED-Pack. That's it for this week's episode of SNEED-CAST Industry Update, but the conversation doesn't stop here. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and don't forget to hit the notification bell down below so you never miss an update. We also want to hear from you. Drop a comment and let us know what topics you'd like to see us dive into next. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and we'll catch you on the next one. Bye, everyone.